can call this meeting to order then at 5:36 p.m. So for those who are here, we have Joffrey, Björn, Stephanie, and Rehan. We have heard from Greg, Sean, Judy, and Naive. Absent today would be Andrea and Funying. Okay. So because we can't vote on the agenda approval, we'll move to the reports then. All right, so I do not have any reports today, so we can move along with Lacey and Joey.
I do not have any reports either.
The only report I have is just the reminder that again, we voted last week's meeting starting this week to move it to every other week. And so I'll send a reminder out, but for those of you to remember, and I updated the calendar invites. So we won't be meeting next Wednesday, we will the Wednesday after that. So especially given that we don't have enough people here for quorum, I'm going to send a reminder email out, just encouraging people that it's important to make sure we're showing up so we can get the few things we need done still this quarter done. So just a reminder, not meeting next week. Next meeting will be April 20th.
Thank you, Joey. Joffrey, do you have any reports today?
I do not have any report at all. I was going to send an email to the student members, also encouraging them to always be coming here because of the urgency of this committee. So I will do that within the next few days or so.
Thank you, Joffrey. Do we have any communications received? Nope. Okay, no communications received, so we can move on to the first call for public comment. Seeing none, we do not have anything for new business on the agenda, but we do have old business, and we will start with the S&A based funding program reviews.
So this is really, as we talked about last week, our first chance to kind of see how we want to set up discussing these and kind of reviewing these. And as you all know, we talked last week and then sent out the reminder. Really what we're looking at is one, which is the odd one out, the administrative support costs, but then really discussing the handful that are all the ASCWU ones to kind of go through. Again, as a reminder, all of these have been provided. We're going to ask for these over the next 3 additional years. And so for this full funding cycle, the intent of the review part here from you all in the committee is really to look at these and make sure we're asking questions if questions arise. Because again, these are the areas we provide a base funding to. If we feel like we're either missing information or what is coming up is raising questions on, are we using this the way it was intended? This is our opportunity each year to kind of touch base with them so we can get clarification for us as a committee, but also to give feedback to each of these base funded units. So that way, when they come around for the next base funding cycle, they know what the committee has been asking and expecting. And so our committee in 4 years or 3 years from now will also know and be able to look back at the feedback we've given. And so for each of these, it's really kind of going through and bringing up, are there questions we had? Are there discussion items? Is there feedback we want to give? And that feedback can either be, keep doing this thing that you said, or we think that's a great, or especially like asking some of those questions. Hey, we'd really like, I know you said you don't have this data, you're not able to get it. We'd really like you to try and provide that moving forward, that type of conversation. My intent, once we've gone through all of these, is I'll be keeping kind of track of them. And once we're done sending feedback back out to all the base funding units, I think there's going to be some feedback we will give in general to all of them. I can tell you, having looked at these, there's some commonalities about questions or feedback, and then there's some that's going to be specific. So we'd send it just to ASCW BOD, their program review, or just to Circ Accounting, their program review type thing. And so that's really the intent of what this is. And this is kind of our first test go round for us as a committee to discuss these and provide some feedback and talk through them. So, Joffrey.
on the best funded, on the ASCW areas, now, should I abstain from asking questions or any comment? Because it is the area that I am in. At least I touch on all of these sections.
Yeah, that is a great question, Joffrey, and you're not the only one who's asked it. So it's really, and this is gonna be tough to say without knowing what the questions are. You can choose to either send them to me electronically if you want, and I'll compile them with it. The part is, I had discussed this a little bit earlier with someone else, is we're not voting on anything. We're not answering questions. Now, I may answer a procedural question, or Lacey may answer a procedural question if you are asking it. But really what we're doing is we're talking through questions we have for the program review or to list it on there. And so knowing that, if it's a question or a feedback on things you would like to see, I think that's stuff you can either make the comment or send it in writing, because we'll compile it all together. I would say probably if it's a giving feedback on, hey, you're doing awesome, probably there'd be a conflict of interest there. So maybe hold back on that one. But good question. Bjorn.
Do we plan to do this like one by one? Because I had a few just general things that seem to apply to all of them or almost all of them.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say in just one second, but I also noticed Andrea was able to join us. And so since we do have quorum, we might, Deanna, I want to jump back to at least approve the agenda and the minutes real quick.
Yes. All right. If everyone has seen the agenda, we can make a vote. Can I entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
So moved by Joffrey, seconded by Bjorn. Any discussion on the agenda? None. Okay, and then we can move to the vote. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0-0. And then we can move to approving last week's minutes. Can I entertain a motion for approving that? Bjorn motions. Any second? I see Rehan raised his hand. Rehan seconds that. Any changes or discussion to last week's minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0-0. And so now we can move along with our old business stuff.
Thank you, Deanna. So to go back to your question, Bjorn, I mean, I think the way that makes the most sense to me, and we'll see if this fits for you, is really, because I agree, I have a couple on these ones that's general feedback or questions, and I think we can give that in a general sense, but then I think after we've given some of that may segue into specific, but otherwise I do want a chance once we've given that is to open up and I'd go through and be like, okay, is there any comments or questions we have on this one? So that way people have the chance specifically. But with that, I'd say I'd open it up to the any general feedback or questions or comments that you have kind of first. Now, again, keep in mind what we're looking at this week is just the administrative support costs and ASCWU. I know some of that's going to segue when you look at the other 30-ish that we have as well. But I'm saying that for the sake, and I know Peggy's going to try and keep track of all of this the best she can. But so did you want to start with some comments or questions, Bjorn?
Sure. The one I had for all of them, and it was more like a question for the committee. Do you think it's worthwhile like asking to obtain some of their feedback data, especially with question 2, I think was data? Because I certainly don't want to quibble or demand that they hand over all their information. It just seems useful to see some of the data if there is data. I it's up to the committee, because some of them did provide some data, and that was really helpful, but I didn't know whether I wanted to demand pictures of Spider-Man and pictures of, input, or just, let them handle that.
I mean, I'll let others give their 2 cents. I mean, my 2 cents on it, Bjorn, is it would probably depend on what data. I think in general, there may be some specific data we want to know now, because it may raise questions or to give feedback. I think some of it, and I'm specifically thinking about the data on, like, how are you assessing the effectiveness of your program and how are you doing that? Like, some of that we may not need right now unless there's a specific program we want to ask or have a reason, but it may be some of that general feedback of, it's great you're doing that. This is data you're going to want to provide for the committee at the next base funding. And so, like, making sure you're keeping that consistent. But some of that may also be dependent on the program or what you're looking at if you want to know. So,
Joffrey, you have a question?
I have a comment on 7. It seems like across the CWU, the question 7A of how do you gather these metrics? It seems like, within the vastness of it, there's not been a clear answer really as in how those metrics are gathered. And I just hope maybe in the future the board is willing and able to motivate them to devise a mean or a metric via which this success or also within the program can be gauged. That is just my sort of a request to the board, just to encourage them into this, into that pursuit, and show us really in its entirety how these metrics can be gathered and effectively used in engaging the how the programs are very well utilized within the college. Also,
Thank you, Joffrey.
I think, I mean, in response to that, Joffrey, I think that's good feedback. I had similar with the metrics, as well as, I mean, one of my general ones on there was asking the question, because if on question number 2, it asks, how are you assessing the effectiveness of your programs? Some of them mentioned things, but it didn't really touch on assessing how effective the program was. And so that was some general feedback I've noticed in most of the program reviews, not all of them. Some have done a great job of, like, we do exactly this to determine if we're meeting our goals. Knowing this is the first year we've asked these questions, that's why I want to make sure we're giving some feedback generally out to say, like, hey, we know you may not have this, or you answered it, but in the future, we're going to want you to be a little more specific in terms of how are you gathering those metrics with the intent, like you should be collecting those metrics. Other general thoughts or questions you all had? Go ahead, Bjorn.
This came up, this was another one, is it worthwhile to ask? This came up a lot with, I think, all of the ASCWU funding areas, but it's going to come up, like, throughout. For unprecedented difficulties, is it worthwhile asking how they plan to spend the presumably extra funding that they still have because of COVID complications? Is it worth asking that? Or I guess it kind of ties in with number 11 in terms of things you want to achieve.
I think with that, I don't know if you want to touch on that one, Lacey, on asking the question if it's worthwhile.
So in general, I think that question is a good question to ask. I'm not sure we should ask it with the program reviews because I think that, and this is just my opinion, because I think we'd get the same standard answer of like, oh, we'll, apply it to future programming, which is probably true. But I think if we can focus more on, I think it was question 11, the last one, where it's the growth, because most likely they're going to say we'd like to be able to expand or whatever that might be for each of those areas. But I know a few of them would be like, oh, we'd like to grow. Well, if they were to do that, they'd have to come back to the committee, and that's when you would be able to ask some really detailed questions, which I think might be a little bit more valuable time. But again, just my opinion.
I have a question. So under on the administrative support costs, that question of what growth or increases do you like to see in your program in the future? Now, for a best funded area that says there's no any increase that is needed or they want for the future, what can be done about that?
I think I missed that last part of the question, Joffrey.
I said for let's say a base funded area does not say there's no any growth or increase they want for the future. What can be done about such a base funded area or such a program to deal with,
Oh, Joe, do you want to go ahead and take this one? I would say in general, it's probably going to be pretty limited on areas that say that there is no growth in funding, potential growth in funding. I think we'll probably only see that with the administrative costs. And that's because the administrative costs they're trying to keep as low as possible. That's the actual intent. So they're not trying to grow that necessarily. They're trying to keep it flat. And I think that's where that answer comes in, is they just want to make sure that they're hitting all their bases with all of the pieces that they actually tie it to with their metrics, but they would prefer not to have to necessarily increase that if they don't have to.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Lacey said. What I was going to say is I think most of them are going to have it. I think the fact that this one doesn't, or if others don't, doesn't necessarily mean that's a negative thing. I think this one makes sense on why they would say that. And I've looked through most of the others. I can't think of any others that don't list any potential for growth. There may be one or two others, but again, I think we can look at them if there's reason we have of like, hey, we think you should. I think it's hard right now to say that, knowing what we're looking at with the budgets. If anyone does say, because it could be just trying to be very realistic with what it is, but I appreciate the question. Yes, Joffrey. Any other general feedback that kind of crossed across multiple of these? Otherwise, we'll kind of jump into each one if there's specific ones you all had.
Go ahead, Bjorn.
Would it be possible to potentially modify the questionnaire for next year, or like propose modifications for next year? Because I feel like one thing that that possibly asking for a little more specificity could be good in some. I mean, obviously we can't apply it like right now because they're in, but it just seemed like something. I suppose maybe next S&A committee can also do. Yeah.
I think, and I apologize, my dog wants to play with the squeaky toy as I'm trying to talk, but I'm going to try and talk over her. I think with what you said, those were some of the ones I had. Is there's some specific that I wanted to be more specific, but I noticed I started making the note, and then the next one did the same thing, and the next one did the same thing, and so I think that's definitely feedback I was planning on providing in general in some specific questions. Like some of them are fine, but others it's like, this one we specifically want to know this information, and you gave us a very broad, which is helpful, but we only needed this part that's real specific on it. So I definitely think, I mean, there can be pieces if we think of it now beyond that. Again, the committee next fall is going to look at these before we send them out. So any feedback we have absolutely will kind of be provided in there to the committee, but also they're going to look as well and can be able to provide feedback too, or tweaks to changes. I'm looking through some of the pieces I did get, because I put out to the committee members who aren't here, they can submit me things in writing. And then also my notes. One of the others, and this was consistent across some of them, is the comment about what circumstances or challenges, when we mentioned COVID and that stuff, but specifically asking, and this is going back to the specificity, what impact has that had? Has it led to you doing less programs, or has it led to less attendance, or what have been some of those impacts, so we get a better sense? Because for me, again, so the information is there and it's helpful, but also I know when we're looking at it, I know I want to know, and that's at least one of the feedback I got from one of the other committee members is, what is the exact impact on that? Because this person was like, everyone has had COVID pandemic related pieces, but it hasn't impacted every program the same way. And so to ask some more specific pieces on that. I think the last general thing I'll say, and then we can start going into them individually if we have it, is the other feedback, and this is only going to really be relevant to ASCW, so I do feel bad. Since we're looking at all of theirs together, and they're the only ones who's going to fall into this, is as you all looked at it, right, there was a lot of duplication of the information. And some of that makes sense. Some of the feedback I'm going to give, and this will be specific to these areas, is going to be, it doesn't need to be duplicated on all of them necessarily. Like some of it could just be under board of directors, those pieces, and then the other ones just to touch on the legislative affairs, or just to touch on equity and service council. I appreciate having the information. If you were only looking at that program review, it's helpful. And so that's why I also recognize we were looking at all of these back, and like I was reading these all back to back. And so as I read through, I was like, that's the same, or this is the same chunk. Let me jump to the other one. And so to save them some time, because that's again where we want them to be as specific but concise as well. So that was the only other kind of general feedback I had on those ones. Any other, just kind of in general, Bjorn?
Yeah, this is going to be generalized to SCW. In terms of, I think all of them said that like individual offices do data collection of their own. For this would have been question 2 for like self-assessment. I was just wondering if we could ask all of them, except legislative affairs include some like office specific stuff. I'll ask the other offices to include their specific data evaluation. It just seemed like a broad thing that could be applied to almost all of them.
Oh, absolutely. I agree to that. Well, with that, I mean, we'll go, and there may not be pieces, but I want to give everyone the chance as we look through it. And so I'll start with the one that's kind of the one-off, the administrative support costs. I know, Joffrey, you already gave some feedback and some questions on it. Beyond what we've generally brought up, I don't know if anyone has any other questions or concerns or feedback that we want to provide for this one specifically. So I'll kind of open it up about the administrative support costs. Seeing none, I'll move to the next one. And I do also want to realize, I should have said this and repeat it again at the start. The other part is, if you all do have additional comments or questions, either that you wrote down and you forgot or didn't get a chance to bring it up, or you think of it later on, you can send those to me via email, because I'm going to go back and compile those along with the minutes to put these all together. So also, if you don't feel comfortable necessarily saying it right here in the public meeting, you can send it. We're still going to share it, and it will be available publicly, but also understand that. So with that, I'm just going to go in the order that I have these. Oh, Joffrey, did you have something on the administrative support costs?
Maybe just a question of clarification. Number 5, it says, how does your program support CWU use mission and goals? And then it says, our service support the mission by offering assistance to our customers to ensure effective stewardship of student funds. That one is the part I really didn't understand. I'm not on it. And then it says this will primarily be S&A, sub, and then rec fees that are collected from students. Maybe you can offer your sense of clarity on that one for me.
So I can try and jump in there. And so really what that means is that part of the business side of the house is responsibilities to ensure that good stewardship of funds is actually happening. And this administrative cost is actually specifically for the S&A piece, but it also helps support the sub, so the student union fee and the rec fee, because as a state, those are all like the same. And so that's why I think they listed the sub and the rec in there as well. But essentially what that means is that those individuals help support the kind of like the skeleton, the background of all of how the funds are spent and allocated, or well, not necessarily allocated, but how they are spent once they are approved. And it's just that administrative process. Does that help, Joffrey?
I just now wonder if the administrative support cost is funded by S&A, based off of that their answer.
I'm sorry, Joffrey, it cut out there. What was that last part?
Oh, I said I just now wonder if the administrative cost is funded by also S&A.
Yeah, so I think I'll try to answer that. The admin fee, the administrative cost, is actually assessed to all of campus. The S&A fee is a significantly less percentage of that. But basically what that does is that goes into to help support, and it lists in there, and I can pull it up, but essentially it helps supports travel, accounts payable, and even IT costs and some things. And essentially like HR is a huge part of that. So this cost is actually helping in those administrative things that are kind of behind the scenes that a lot of people don't think about. And just to kind of put that into one section, the rest of the university also has responsibilities in that as well. This is supposed to only be to help support all of the, like, for example, the hiring of ASCW officers and their student wages. That is something that helps, this administrative cost helps support that to actually get in the system and get hired and all of the beautiful things that happen. And that's just one example.
And so by your estimation, what percent of S&A fee really supports at the administrative cost or administrative support cost, by your estimation?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm almost thinking maybe, Joey, we can actually put that one in writing, because the admin fee is across the entire campus. And so it'd probably be best to actually have the CFO or the controller of the university answer that, so we can get a more exact percentage.
Thank you for the clarification.
And I saw your comment in the chat, Andrea, that helped to answer your question. Do you have any others on the admin fee?
No, it was only like for number 2, but since y'all clarified like what it really covers, because I personally like going through the other reports and like the administrative costs, it did like look very like, oh, there's not very much detail here. So no, yeah, that definitely clarified it. I appreciate it.
Good. Yeah, like I said, it's definitely the odd one out, especially in the group of all the ASCW. It's the odd one out of all of the base funded units, let alone these others are all similar.
It is, and I will just preface that with this program review of trying to be as concise as possible, since it was definitely reiterated multiple times by Joey to be concise. They didn't go in as much detail as they did their base funding presentation. And so when you were talking about metrics and like how that data is collected, this one specifically has so much that I would say reference the base funding, because they really outline like how many travel authorizations happen and how many of this and so forth, and how they actually came up with that calculation. But it's hard to put it in this format. So I would say if you have any questions, go to the base funding documents on the website.
Okay, so I'm going to jump over and we'll go through the other ASCW ones specifically. And so I'll start with the Academic Senate. Joffrey.
Number 6, please provide detailed information regarding who utilizes your program. And then it says not estimated. What's that mean?
I couldn't hear over my dog squeaking in the background. You said it asked the question number 6 about who utilizes the program, and then what was the second part?
And then the answer is not estimated.
Oh, are you talking about still on the administrative support cost one?
Right.
Got it. I don't have an answer for that. That could be for lazy. I have a question mark next to that on mine as well. I know how I would answer that question for this one. And that's probably something what we may ask for a follow-up just to provide more.
I think that could be a good follow-up question. I think what's difficult about this is that this doesn't have a direct service to like a program, and so I think that's probably why they answered that way, where it just gets complicated of like, well, like that would be great. It's like, what information do you want? Do you want how many students have been hired? Do you want to know how many travel authorizations do we have? Are we talking about quantity? Are we talking about unique? Are we talking about the sheer amount of dollar figure? Are we talking about how many computers we actually have in our facility? And how many people service the software, the hardware, the actual equipment? And so it's so complex that I would say absolutely ask that question, but I would almost push back and say, maybe ask more of a specific question of, do you want those types of metrics? Because this one is really based off of that administrative cost, which again, Joey's been saying is a little unique and might not have the exact like, oh, these are the specific students, because we don't necessarily track how many students log into our workstations when they're submitting a travel authorization. There's certain things like that maybe IT has that information, but that's not something necessarily that we review, if that makes sense.
No, and the other part that makes it complicated beyond what Lacey just said is the administrative support cost goes to all of these different administrative functions of the universities. And so accounts payable and HR and the travel and IT and all that. However, the other part, so like I could see that answer being, well, who utilizes the programs? It's students and it's faculty and it's staff. However, the S&A portion is really going for those administrative support pieces to support all the other 39 base funded pieces that's under it. And so again, it's still students and staff and pieces within there, but it gets complicated, which is why the question, I just put the question mark. I knew probably why they did, but I also know you could give but you can go down the rabbit hole, as Lacey was saying, of there's so much info here because each one of those different parts, and again, as she said, if you look at the base funding request from last year, they give the rough metrics to justify the dollar figure. And so X number of transactions for the travel desk and X number of student employees who are employed in the S&A funded units. And you get a lot of that data there within it. So again, this one's a little bit more an oddity.
And to add on, I think the reason why I wanted to add a couple of pieces is that there could be a standard answer of everybody utilizes it. And I think maybe we could think about another question directed to this area that's a little different, because at least I'm not sure that would be super beneficial for the committee to know, but it might be beneficial for those other, things that we talked about with metrics of who you like, how many, transactions or how many, employees did they hire and so forth. That might be a little bit more beneficial than who utilizes the service. So hopefully my rambling made a little bit of sense.
Any feedback or questions related to the ASCW Academic Senate program review? Beyond, again, the general comments we kind of made. Okay. Again, if you have them, you can send them to me later too if you think of things. I'm just going to move on to the next one. The other one, and so the next one I have is really the ASCW Board of Directors, which is the larger one, right? I mean, that's the encompassing within most of those. And so any questions, feedback, concerns that may have come up when you're looking at that one specifically?
I have,
go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, for number 3, where it says about the overlaps and then they mention there are a number of collaborations, would it be beneficial to probably ask for the details, like what collaborations and like how maybe those are, I guess what they're saying here, necessary to ensure that the ASU board is effective?
I think that's a good question. I mean, we can definitely put that in there and kind of ask them for more, ask them to elaborate more on that, especially when they answer this in the future. Yeah.
Okay.
The one that I had for this one that I see here written down is on, and this may apply to more than just this one, but I had it tied to this one, is question 7. And I think this goes back to a little bit of also what we're talking about with others is we're asking for them to be more specific. And this kind of goes actually with what Lacey was saying a minute ago with the administrative support costs. Like the answer is it serves all communities on campus, which is accurate within there. I think when we're asking the question of how many students utilize, this may be one where we ask them in the future to be more specific. Well, it serves all, how many engage or utilize, and whether, however they want to measure that. Because again, board of director, each one of those units, right, as you see with the other requests, is going to have different metrics. And so it's really, when we talk to the board of directors at large, what would that program look? Are we talking their regular business meetings? Are we talking different things like that? But who is utilizing that, or how many contacts type things that we're getting within that sense? Because some of these are things I think we want to know of. It's there to serve all students, but if we have a program that serves all students, but only a small number of students are really engaging or participating, that's helpful for us as a committee to know, and potentially for feedback on, hey, we think, well, yeah, you serve all students, only this group is using it. We'd encourage you to do some more broad outreach within those areas. The other part, and this is more my nitpicky thing that you all may have heard on other stuff, is I'd push back on anything we say where it's communities on campus. Since ASCW, BOD, and a number of these programs are for the university, and campus tends to imply Ellensburg campus. And I have that on one other one who said Ellensburg, to make sure we're being mindful of serving our students at all of our locations and online. And some of that could be language, but also I think that ties into who's using those services too, when we see that. Any other questions or thoughts or feedback on the BOD specific program review? Awesome. So the next one is Club Senate, so the ICA Interclub Association. Here.
Just a point of clarification that would help me understand the whole application here. What's the structure that ICA is under? Is it within Slice this year, or I haven't kept track of that? I mean, it's not necessarily important to the base funding review. It would just help me understand a little more.
Lacey, did you want to talk about that structure with ICA? I know you work with it a lot with the funding side of things.
Sure. I mean, I will say I do think that that is a good question and probably should be answered by the director, but I will do my best. So essentially, ICA is now under and managed by the Slice's office. And so it does have funding available for clubs and other activities within the club realm. But the budget and the support, like the administrative support, is actually handled by someone in the Slice's office. So ICA still, they can still request funds. It still goes through kind of circuit counting for processing and so forth. So there probably isn't a whole lot of changes in that front, but I would say if we want any more details, it'll probably be great to get Amber in here.
I mean, I will say my general feedback is I appreciated they gave a lot of specific data tied to ICA in this one, which I think was helpful. The hard part is like, how much data do we really want? Because even if you jump to question number 6, they gave the breakdown by the years. And I made a little note, like I would also like to know the ethnicity and the gender piece and all that. But knowing they have that to be stuff later on. I think the only one I really had is, I didn't see this in here and I could have missed it. So if I did, someone tell me, but I know they mention when they're talking about the number of clubs and the number that work with ICA, the question I kind of had on here is that I think would be helpful to know, and this will change each year, promise it changes each quarter, is how many are considered active clubs or clubs in good standing within that, because I think that would be beneficial to know. How many are officially recognized? Yeah, recognized as active was the language. Any other comments or questions about the ICA program review? Bjorn?
This kind of doubles with Equity Services Council. Once a club completes the year-long process of becoming an equity services organization, do they switch from the ICA budget to the ESC budget? I'm not sure if it's salient here, but
That's a very good question. So I almost think we need to probably ask that to get it in writing, because it has to do with their bylaws. And I know that they're out there and I know they're probably on the website, but I would say that is a good question to ask so we can have it for documentation.
I know maybe Stephanie would have a better.
Oh, you muted in the middle of that, Andrea.
See, sorry, my phone's tweaking out. But I'm the executive assistant for the ESC, and so I don't know if this like would be conflict of interest, but just to like clarify, that on our end, when they go from a club to an organization, they will be under ESC and they will get like the 3,500 organization gets from the ESC. It wouldn't, from what I know, it wouldn't really be under ICA anymore. And to mention on the whole active thing, I know for the organizations on here that are mentioned, the 7 are the active ones. I'm not sure for the clubs, since ESC isn't clubs really. I can say for the ESC that these are the active ones.
Thank you, Andrea. And I did note that on the ESC one. That was what made me think of going back to the other one, because they mentioned those 7, and then under the growth, there are 2 that expressed interest. And so I was like, wait, I know not all of those under the ICA are recognized as active, given the requirements. Well, with that, I think I'm going to segue into ESC, because that's the next one I have on here, and kind of give the feedback. So any specific feedback or questions for ESC program review? Again, if you think of any, you can send them later on. I didn't have any. I mean, the only ones I had with this were the general ones that we've already talked about. So we'll jump to the program review for student life and facilities. I think and this is, I don't know, a comment to give them feedback. I think for me, when you jump to like question number 6, because when we're talking student life and facilities, we're really talking that position that's there and their role in representing and providing student voice. I'm not aware, and even in reading this, I don't see that there's really programs or things that they put on other than providing that position. And so I think that was a hard one based on their all students served through this position, current demographic data. But it's not really, given everything described in there, a program when you talk student life and facilities. And so I think that would be one. I don't know the best way to give them feedback on how to provide information or details on who's using it or what are those demographic pieces, other than potentially outreach they've received from students or things like that. Any other questions, feedback on student life facilities? Bjorn?
Yeah, just a basic clarification. It looked like question 3, the answer got cut off or something. I don't know if that was a formatting error. I was just wondering if anything important was missed there.
That is a great question, Bjorn. And I know the part that we have in there, because when you get to question number 3, like they had the similar parts above, and then that's where the position is primary collaborator. And it started to be that same sentence that the others were, while this position, while these services overlap, there's not a similar structure or formal service of. So that would be a good question. Okay, and then the last one we have today is the ACW Legislative Affairs Program Review. I think for me, and this one I mentioned a minute ago, the one piece of feedback I had for them was on question number 6. I appreciate a lot of their answers were specific to legislative affairs. The one I had on here is they said their demographic of this piece is, and the program's mostly focused on students who are here on the Ellensburg campus. So essentially, if you're a student on the campus, our programs are made for you. And so I wanted to just give the feedback again, especially because our legislative affairs area, ironically, is one that travels to the west side of the state. And so being mindful that they should be expanding their programming and being mindful to include our online and our center students. So that was the one comment I put on here for them specifically. But other questions or feedback for the legislative affairs? Bjorn?
This was a simple reading comprehension one. On question 6, they mentioned listed above. I wasn't sure if listed above meant listed in the question or like on a separate question. That may have been just a me problem, but I couldn't quite understand that.
We can definitely ask for clarification. I can tell you when I read that, now that you're saying it, I see where you got it. I definitely took that as consisting of all the categories listed above as the categories in the question for number 6. But you're right, it could be something other than that. So with that, and again, if you all have other comments or feedback on the administrative support costs at CWU, definitely feel free to send them to me. We're going to be compiling these again as we go through all of them. I guess before I give next steps, my question would be for you all in general, because again, this is the first time we've been doing the program reviews this way, and we use this as kind of our test of how we wanted to go about reviewing it as a committee together. Do you all feel that this is beneficial to do it this way, or would you prefer, as we look at the others, that there's a different method or modality you would want to do that? Just want to get feedback from you all.
On the other side, I wonder if we should create a rubric into trying solving some of these questions, because if we try to compare it with any other another report again, you know, such a report may have a bit of a weakness too. And so I just wonder, as the committee, should we create a rubric and we all agree on that this is a rubric we would go with, and then evaluate these reports?
I think that's a good question, Joffrey. My recommendation would be, I think after we've looked at all of them because then we get a chance, we've seen all of them. And people, because I don't know about others. I don't know if everyone has looked through all of them yet or just these ones. And so I think once we've looked through them, that might give people a better sense of, one, if we want to do the rubric, but also what that rubric would look like. Because again, administrative support costs being the odd one out today, the others are all relatively similar. And we'll see as we go through all these other 30 programs, they're going to be even more unique. And so you're not going to get the same type of consistency we did with the ASCWU ones. So, I mean, that would be my recommendation, is once we go through those to get a better sense. I think it's a good question to ask to help future committee.
I think what we're doing works just fine. As you mentioned, every program is going to be unique. So kind of just like being like, okay, which question may sound like it needs more information or so on. But I personally think that this works.
Thank you, Andrea. Any other thoughts or ways you all would like to change or tweak it? Otherwise, I'll kind of give the plan of, we'll look at these next ones knowing it's 2 weeks out and talk about those. But any other thoughts or feedback on just the process? Okay, so we'll stick with this as we go through the other ones. So knowing we have 2 weeks until our next meeting, also knowing I want to be mindful of our time, like this is the only business stuff we have for our last few meetings. We don't need to extend it for all of them. obviously, but knowing we just went through and did 7 of these is how many we went through tonight. Do you all feel like that's an adequate amount for us to go through? Is between 7 to 10 in a meeting? I don't want to throw all of them in because I think we'll rush through it. But does that seem reasonable? I know it means the meetings will be about this long as we go through. Now they may not be because we've given some of that general feedback and talked through it, but would you all like me to break up the last? I think we have just a little over 30. I think we have 33 actually. Break those up over the next kind of 3 or 4 meetings. I see some nodding and some back and forth. The alternative would be, do we want to go through like all of these in one meeting? I see, okay, shaking of head, thank you. It's gonna leave it up to you all. So I'll send out, oh, go ahead, Beer.
What if we broke them up over like 3 meetings and then use the last meeting for like review, kind of like Joffrey mentioned? Well, that would be like 11 per meeting, which might be a little steep, but.
What I was thinking, and that's what I was looking at on there with our remaining meetings, is I may have us do 11 for the next one. And again, knowing we have 2 weeks, and then if when we get to the meeting 1, we either felt that wasn't enough time or there was too many in the course of our meeting, we can adjust it from that point. But I'll send via email for you all as a reminder, but also for the committee members who aren't here, saying here are the ones we're going to look at. Please make sure to review these prior to next meeting, and we'll do the same type of thing. Come prepared with comments and things like that. But I'll probably continue just us going alphabetically, so we don't miss any of them. And so it'll really be campus activities through. Hold on, Mom. I think through what would be Museum of Culture and Environment. If you're looking at it, I'll confirm and send that tomorrow to you all via email, just to make sure I've broken them out over the next few meetings. And I'll probably send that just all together. Here's the ones for this meeting, for this meeting, for this meeting. All right. Any questions about any of this before we kind of just move on? All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it because, again, this is a new process we're doing for these reviews, and I'm hoping it's going to be beneficial not just for us as the committee, but also for the base funded units to get that feedback. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Deanna.
Thank you, Joey. So now we can move on to the second call for public comment on the agenda. Joey.
I have 2 if my dog doesn't interrupt, because now she's wanting to talk. This is the joy of having huskies, is they talk back to you. The first one is just saying Ramadan Mubarak, the happy Ramadan for those of our students who celebrate that. The other one is just a reminder for students that we do have ASCW general elections debates. We already had one earlier this week, and I believe the next one, and I'm looking at those of you in here, I think is April 11th. Yep, I see a nodding of head. So we have the next general election debates, April 11th, coming up. And I'm saying all this because I know our next meeting isn't for 2 weeks on that end. And so also be mindful that by the time we come into our next meeting, voting, I believe, if I'm doing my math correct, will be open that whole week. And so I'll give another reminder for students that voting for the general elections will be open. But for all of those of you available, please definitely take a chance to go view and participate in those debates.
Joey, just curious, are we inviting like candidates for executive vice president to our meetings and contributing to, or
So yeah, there's currently
program?
right now. Oh, sorry, it cut off.
Sorry. Are we having the candidates for executive vice president to sit through the program reviews as well? And kind of gauge how they would kind of navigate this process next year. Joffrey?
Yeah, I think they came to shadow me. Yeah, they came to shadow me and see how the process goes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I know they've been here. We have one candidate, and they have received just the invite, which I appreciate. Joffrey forwarded that. I turned my camera off because my connection, I think, is going slow. And so they have been invited and able to participate. And I know they were here earlier in this meeting to see part of that. So I think it's a great point, though, Deanna. And I think something we should keep in mind moving into the future too, knowing we're going to continue these, is as we have those candidates coming up, not only invite them to see what it is, but to hear some of that feedback and know how those operate. It's a great point.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we can move to adjourn this meeting. Can I entertain a motion? I saw Joffrey motioned and Bjorn seconds. All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0-0. Thank you, everybody. And meeting is called adjourned at 6:37 p.m.
Thank you all. Have a great 2 weeks. Good luck with classes. See you then.